We've got a result coming, so we better hang on a moment. This, no, here's the result. Let's take it then, shall we? Hendon North, the Conservative is in. Mr. Charles Orr Ewing, who once upon a time was in the BBC television service and is now Financial Secretary and Parliamentary Financial Secretary to the Admiralty, has held on to this possibly marginal seat, and he's put his majority up from 4,000 to 5,300.
One of those rare cases of a lost Liberal deposit. A 1.5% swing to the Conservatives
Another
in Hendon
result,
North.
Kingston upon Hull East, or just Hull East if you like it better. Labour is in. The Labour majority is up a trifle, 300 or 400.
Liberals scoring over 10,000 there, too.
Here is Rowley Regis and Tipton, which Labour has held. This is in Staffordshire in the Black Country, by the way. Arthur Henderson is in again in this seat. His majority is down by about 3,000. Hitchin, the Conservatives are in at Hitchin. They've held the marginal seat headquarters. Let's go over there now.
I've Lord Hailsham in the studio here. He's just come in. And Lord Hailsham, it looks as if things are going very well for the Conservative Party. Do you think the Conservative Party have won this election at this stage?
I've consistently not predicted results. But I'm not discontented with the way things are going.
But can you predict a victory at the moment?
I'm not predicting anything.
The experts that we've been listening to on the programme seem quite convinced that the Conservatives have won.
Then you should believe the experts.
And you don't regard yourself as an expert?
No.
At what time did you begin to feel that things were, giving you satisfaction, as you put it?
I've thought of this thing as a case, a jury case. And it's gone exactly as I had wanted it to go. In every jury case, you've got to be armed at every point. You've got to have the answers to the other side's case, you've got to have your own case. But there's always one point on which you're going to win. The secret of success in advocacy is to make events follow the pattern of which will give you success on the point on which you mean to win.
What does this mean now in terms of hard fact about the campaign?
It means that I was certain that the point was the financial irresponsibility of the Labour Party. And the only question was timing at which that element should be exposed.
And when was that exposed, in your view?
In the second week of the campaign.
About the results that we've had so far, I don't want to go into them in great detail, but about the results generally, is there one or another that has given you particular satisfaction?
This would involve a discussion of personalities.
And you don't feel like going into that now?
It's not my business to discuss personalities.
Could you say what you feel about the effect that the Liberals have had on the results as we've seen them so far?
Much as I expected.
Well, thank you very much, Lord Hailsham. And now we're returning you back to our central studio. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you. Delighted.
And in the central studio we have Birmingham, the Northfield division, a marginal, where Labour is in again, but the Labour majority has dropped from 2,900 down to 940. It's gone down by 2,000. Here's some information. Over then to Transport House.
And back at Transport House and Mr. Morgan Phillips. Mr. Phillips, you heard what Lord Hailsham said. You accept this point about financial irresponsibility of the Labour Party in this campaign?
Certainly not. Indeed, I think they've been successful in exploiting the idea, aided by the press. And you will find that the people of this country will soon see their mistake. We can see another period of high interest rates, increased bank rate. You will find that monetary controls will lead to unemployment and various other things.
What do you think then has been chiefly responsible for this swing to the right?
Well, it's very difficult to say. Entirely, in some of the cases we've lost, there are particular reasons, but that doesn't explain them all. Mm-hmm. There are one or two factors. The poll in the south has not been as high, apparently, as in the north. The swing in the south has been in the opposite direction to what it has been in the north. But I don't think we can complain about that. People have turned out to vote. It was our job to get them out to vote, and in that measure we succeeded.
Well, it's often been said by the Labour Party that it is a failure to get their voters there. Has the size of the poll disappointed you this time?
Well, I can't give you the exact size of the poll at the stage, but we're not disappointed at a high poll. Frankly, I think if you can get 77 to 80, it's a very good poll indeed, having regard to the number of people who move, who die, or away on holiday, or away working and can't get back to vote.
So you have no complaints at all on that score?
On that score, no.
Are there any seats which you still hope to win?
Oh, yes, there are quite a number that we still hope to
Which
win.
are those, Mr. Phillips?
Well, I'm not absolutely certain what's in between studio and studio. I'm not quite certain what's been happening. But there are quite a number that can modify the Tories' success.
Well, maybe this is one of them, because we're going back to the studio to see.
So,
Just before we take it, one word from Bob, quickly.
That's the first formal concession in the interview with Morgan Phillips that the Labour Party has lost the election.
Now, the result. It is Erith and Crayford. Here it is. Labour's in again at Erith and Crayford. The majority is down by about 3,000.
W.R. Milligan, the Conservative and Unionist. The Labour candidate is George Stott. And now Sheriff Gilchrist is just coming to the rostrum to announce the result.
To Mr. Gateskill, let us go to Leeds.
Well, Mr. Gateskill, what do you make of the most recent results?
Well, I must admit, in view of the results that have come in so far, it seems clear that there is going to be another Conservative government. And therefore I must concede, in this sense, victory to our opponents. Naturally, we are greatly disappointed. We had hoped to win, and we have not won. But it is the will of the people, and we accept it. But I will say this, if I may, particularly to our own supporters. I would like to thank them, those particularly who have worked so hard for us during this election, and to say to them, not to be too despondent or too dismayed. We have lost the battle, but the struggle continues, and in the end we shall win.
Lord Hailsham said that if the government won this election, it would mean the extinction of socialism forever in the future. What do you say to that?
Most emphatically, no. Lord Hailsham is no authority on socialism. The ideals of democratic socialism shine as brightly as ever, even if we have not succeeded on this occasion in winning the election.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gateskill.
The result from Ince in Lancashire, which has been Labour for more than half a century. It is...
Behind Cross Hands, we've been watching the results in what I must call, I think, an increasing gloom, at least the people here have been. And, of course, we've just heard Mr. Gateskill has conceded the election. Now, what do you think about what's happened?
Well, I think this can only be regarded as a disaster for left-wing idealism at large. Now, when one talks of long-term left-wing idealism, one must remember that most people think in terms of the price of sausages, the cost of living index generally, and if they have been lulled into a general sense of security by the state of affairs in the nation since 1951 and on through 55 to 1959, if, by and large, conditions seem to them to have been reasonably pleasant, if, in short, the Tory party has not been too obviously and grossly oppressive and jackbooting in its tactics, then they would tend to feel, well, they're not such a bad lot, really. Let us leave things as they are. Now, that seems to me to be conservatism with a small c.
And that's what you think is triumphed?
True.
How do you feel about it?
Well, I can't really understand. I've changed my mind about 3 times since the first focused. I thought that Labour was going to make a fight of it.
Yes, you were giving me odds on it.
Yes. Well, but now I've had to change my mind, and they've actually lost. And they have lost by a bigger majority than I ever thought.
Well, why do you think they've lost so heavily, then?
Well, I personally think that in England they've held their seats. Only 2 results from Wales, and they are still Labour. And I'm confident Wales is still Labour. But
what is it, then? Is there some radical spirit in Wales, you think?
Yes.
Well, I must hand you back now from Cross Hands to Richard Dimbleby in London.
This is to give you the Edinburgh North result, where the Right Honourable W.R. Milligan, this is confirmation, I think. Milligan is in.
Well, all up and down the country, there are many groups such as the one I'm with here. Commercial travelers, people who spend a lot of their lives in hotels, and we've been sitting here and will continue to do so. And by the way, they don't mind being called commercial travelers at all. My friend here's from Cardiff. Well, now, you heard what they said down in Cross Hands, their reaction to Mr. Gaitskell's statement that this isn't the end of socialism. How do you feel about that?
Well, my own opinion is this, that if the percentage of votes swing recorded towards the Conservatives is anything to go by, well, then presumably we will not see a return of a Labour government in the near future. Conversely, anything can happen in the next 5 years which could swing the public completely in the other direction.
Back to socialism again?
Quite possibly.
Well, now, I have a friend here from Southport, and he, in fact, made a very accurate forecast. What was the forecast you made before this election?
Oh, I made a 5-seat gain for the Conservatives, but I was way out on that.
Yes. What about the Liberals?
But the Liberals, I made a 1-seat gain, and of course they are 1 seat up.
At the moment?
At the moment.
Well, now, about your vote, did you cast a postal vote, or did you...
No, I went to the polls this morning before coming out and cast it then.
Well, now, what's your reaction to the socialist departure and Mr. Gaitskell's statement?
Well, I think he's only defending himself. I thought this morning and in the past few days that the Labour, as such, was on the way out. And I'm perfectly certain that whatever form of Labour there is will be much more a combination of Labour and Liberal in the future.
And talking about the vote that our friend from Southport cast, he managed to get his vote in before he took to the road, as so many people like him do. But now, that wasn't the case with you, was it?
No, I used the postal vote.
How long ago did you arrange for it?
Approximately 3 weeks ago.
So there's somebody who really made certain that he was going to cast his vote, and that's just a small part of what must be a very large opinion up and down the country among the commercial travellers. Back to you now in London.
Back here in town, we better have a look, I think, at the state of the parties once again.
And now a three-cornered fight at Edinburgh Leith. The MP in the last Parliament since 1945 is James H. Hoy, who is the Labour candidate. The National Liberal and Conservative is Gershom Stewart. The Liberal is Sir Andrew Murray. Now here is the Sheriff, Sir James Gilchrist.
I have now to announce the result of the election for Edinburgh Leith constituency. James Hutchison Hoy,
Labour,
15,092 votes. Gershom Stewart, 12,018 votes. Sir Andrew Hunter of Arbuthnott Murray, 4,475 votes. And I declare that the following person has been duly elected to serve in Parliament as a member for Edinburgh Leith constituency, James Hutchison Hoy.
The seat has been held by Labour. No change. Now back to Richard Dimbleby in London.
Pool. There has been, by the way, a complaint that
I said that this was the
first time a government had been returned 3 times. The answer is I said no such thing. Somebody hasn't been listening carefully. Mackenzie may have said something of the sort, and I'll ask him to explain quickly.
Yes, it's the first time a government, at the end of a term of office of this kind, has been returned 3 times running. You can go back to 1906 to 1910, when the Liberals won 1906 and 2 elections in 1910, but this is the first cycle of this kind we've had of full terms of office. 51, 55, 55, 59, and now 59 to 64.
100 years ago, 57, 59, 65, the Liberals won. It's going back to a different world, of course.
Yes. Here is Walsall North. Labour has been returned. Mr. Wells, Queen's Counsel, member of the Wolfenden Committee.
Liberals so far have lost their deposits. 1 ILP candidate, 1 independent socialist, 7 communists, 1 fascist, Sir Oswald Mosley, 1 independent peace candidate, 1 Socialist Party of Great Britain candidate, 1 Sinn Féiner, and 1 a member of the Lancastrian Party. Nobody a member of the Conservative or Labour Party yet.
I make that 3,000 quid for the Consolidated Fund, right? Roughly. My mathematics aren't bad, are they? Let's see the party lead, shall we?
Conservative lead over Labour now 28. Again, very surprising at this state of play. These are seats, many of them, which Labour ordinarily would have won, and especially counting in the urban areas this way.
Results by time of appearance.
This is a healthy reminder of what happened last time. On the night when the Conservatives ended up with a majority of 60, it was level pegging all the night. The Conservatives, I think, were 2 seats up, or Labour was 2 seats up when dawn came, and then when the second day's results came in, the Conservatives pushed ahead to a final majority of just over 60 over Labour. So I think we're bound to see the same sort of picture tomorrow, and the Conservatives look like ending up with a considerably bigger lead because they're already 20-odd seats, nearly 20 seats ahead.
There's a result on its way, I observe. 2, in fact. In the Hector Hughes has held his seat at Aberdeen North.
Results by time in this election, compared with the one we saw a moment ago, you'll notice that on that graph you don't see a distinct Conservative lead. There's a slight Conservative lead, but almost certainly the second part of the program tomorrow, you'll see the widening out of the Conservative gap based on the rural areas reporting.
Despite a larger turnout, the results have come in faster. It's a steeper curve coming up over the 100.
We've got a couple more coming right now, I think.
There you can see last time compared with the results so far this time, with that widening out at the top there of the Conservatives as the rural areas come in, and dead heat on the night on the left part.
Here is Bristol West. The Conservatives are in studio to Conservative Party headquarters to hear from Mr. Macmillan.
Well, it looks, Mr. Macmillan, as if I'm still in order in addressing you as Prime Minister, though that isn't absolutely certain. Can you tell us how you feel at this stage in the election results?
Well, of course. All the results are not yet in and will not be till, I suppose, tomorrow afternoon. But so far, they certainly seem satisfactory. If, as I hope, it means a Conservative majority in the next House of Commons, I think my first feelings are of 2 kinds.
On the whole, has the campaign gone rather as you expected it would?
Oh, well, I don't know. I rather feel at the moment I don't want to say more than that first, if it does result in our return to power, one feels a tremendous encouragement of the kindness and the confidence of the people. But the second feeling is, I assure you, just as strong, the very great burdens and the great problems that lie ahead.
You've had a number of campaigns in your lifetime, Prime Minister. Has this one been more or less grueling than most that you've experienced?
Well, of course, it's rather different doing it as Prime Minister, much less in my own constituency and much more going round. It's been frightfully exciting. I got 2 feelings. First, a great sense of buoyancy and keenness of everybody. And second, which I think is a very healthy sign, a great willingness to listen to reasoned argument from meetings of which obviously half were perhaps not agreed with you, but they wish to hear a sensible and reasoned argument.
Do you think on the whole that statesmen are required to spend too much of their energy in going out and making speeches up and down the country when they might be doing something more constructive?
Well, owing to the admirable operation of our civil service, I found that affairs have been managed quite well in my absence. But, of course, it's a great news train. But it will also draw something from it. For to sit alone in the middle of London and not draw strength from the people and meet them and get their ideas would turn you into a mandarin and not a leader.
What role do you think television has played in this election? Some people said this would be the first television election.
Well, I've been very struck by the very large meetings. And I think that important as television is, the people still like to see the man and have the personal contact. All the so-called whistle-stops meetings that I had in the open air ranged from between 3,000 to 6,000 people. And they obviously wanted to hear a man alive, not just on the television.
Do you think that this election campaign has been watched with more or less interest by other countries than preceding elections?
I think with great interest.
Why?
Well, because so much turns upon whether Britain is going to remain strong and powerful, absolutely determined that its economy should be sound, and play a leading role in the world.
Do you think this election rates higher in international affairs than domestic affairs than preceding elections?
Well, I was very struck by, although the enormous interest in home affairs, how every part of I don't think I ever made a speech without at least a third or even half of it being on foreign affairs. And when one spoke on these foreign problems, everybody seemed to listen with great interest.
And are you expecting this election to, the result of this election, are you expecting the result of this election to enable this country to play a stronger role in international affairs? Do you expect more power from this election?
Well, I was I don't know what the end of it is going to be, but I hope it means a good parliamentary majority. I was always felt that if one party had a majority of 6 or another of 10, it would enormously handicap us in the months that lie ahead, because the government then is weak and uncertain. But it's an enormous advantage that it should go fairly strongly one way or the other, so that the government can go about its job with the certainty that it's got the control of affairs in Parliament.
Is it true what we've heard, Prime Minister, that it is in foreign affairs that you hope the result of this election is likely to bear most fruit?
I think that's true in a way, because there's so much wider field and opportunities. At home, we aren't in a bad position if we can only keep it. In the foreign field, they're opening up enormous possibilities.
Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister, for coming along and giving us the first opportunity of putting these questions to you. And may I, at the end of the interview, congratulate you on
Well,
the trend.
I was born a Scot. I'm a cautious man. I won't say anything till the last.
We congratulate you on the trend.
Trend is always good.
And now.
And back in the studio here, David Butler wishes to give a short session in swing up here.
I think it was 3.5 hours ago that Bob Mackenzie said that Labour needed that swing, 2% or more, to win the election. Well, at the beginning of the night, it was all over the place. 1 or 2 the other way made us think we must hesitate. But after 30 results, it settled down, and it has been staying steady now. The average swing over the whole country, 1.3% improvement of Conservative position over Labour. And this points to a Conservative majority of something in the region of 110 over Labour, over 100 over all parties in the next Parliament.
Let's see the state of the parties a moment then now. Thank you, David. State of the parties. Here they are, Bob.
Here we've got a position then with 16 Labour losses where they needed 38 gains to win this election. And this, of course, has meant, in fact, that with the shifts going on between the parties as well, that the Liberals are now slightly stronger and Conservatives quite stronger in a quite important way with 15 gains. We've got through results much more rapidly than usual.
We've got a lot of results against ourselves now. Woolwich East, where Christopher Mayhew, Labour, has been returned. The majority is slightly under. This is Mr. Mayhew, whose face you will know very well from the BBC television screen. Let us move on to Wednesbury in Staffordshire, held by Labour, by Mr. John Stonehouse, whose adventures you will remember in Nyasaland.
Conservative and Unionist Lord John Hope, Labour John P. McIntosh. Here is the sheriff.
These are the ones still not yet heard from. The results, personal results, not yet heard from on the Conservative side. We don't know yet the result in Mr. McMillan's own constituency, Selwyn Lloyd, R.A. Butler, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Heathcote Amory, or the Colonial Secretary, or Sir David Eccles. We have heard in all of the fate of 4 of our front benchers on the Conservative side. Dr. Charles Hill was the first to get returned, although he had a seat that could have been a little difficult if things had gone badly for the Conservative Party. The others in, Ian MacLeod came in a spate of results, the Minister of Labour, and undoubtedly one of the coming figures in the Conservative Party. It's been suggested, indeed, that he might be a contender for the succession to Mr. Harold Macmillan. Then to Duncan Sands, also considered by some as a possible future Prime Minister, as is Reginald Modling. 3 of the younger, outstanding figures on the Conservative front bench are all so far returned.
Confirmation.
If we could look now at the position on the Labour bench, still outside a number of well-known figures, Mr. Nairn Bevan, who if he isn't returned, it would be a miracle, of course, with his enormous majority.
Bob,
Bob,
I'll just interrupt you 1 second. I've been called for... Sorry. I've stopped him now, so we'll just confirm Edinburgh Pentlands, where the Conservatives are in. You can check the results for yourselves. There are the figures. You heard it being announced from Edinburgh just now. Lord John Hope. The majority is about 1,300 up. With that, we return to Mr. Mackenzie with apologies.
Harold Wilson had probably the most precarious majority of Labour frontbenchers that we're dealing with here, and his position in Huyton, of course, we haven't yet heard from, and he might conceivably be in some danger, although the fairly strong position of Labour in Lancashire will undoubtedly be likely to save him. The deputy leader of the party, James Griffiths, also to be heard from. Just, if I may, to round up quickly, because I'll come back to the others, those who are in on the Labour side and sure of their places are, of course, the leader of the opposition, Hugh Gateskill, who has conceded the election to the Conservatives, Patrick Gordon Walker, one of his powerful supporters, and Dr. Summerskill, as well as Sir Frank Soskis. This is the group so far in Parliament, 4 on each side of our particular group of frontbenchers, with others to be heard from later tonight and on tomorrow's results.
Thank you, and with that, to the state of the party.
On the state of the parties, we are still in this position. I don't think it shows any changes.
To Cliff Mitchell more.
Good. Well, we're talking to that one. Among the people who've been sitting round contemplating the results as they've been pouring in is the Oxford historian, Alan Bullock. And it'd be interesting to know how you see it now, Mr. Bullock, how you see how this battle's gone, and perhaps the repercussions that it's likely to have.
I think the repercussions are what interests one most. All through the 1950s, English politics, to some extent, has been bound by the tightness of the two parties. It's true it pulled apart a bit in the 1955 election, but all the same, all through, ever since 1950, neither party has had a really clear majority. Now, it looks as though this may be ending, and in the 1960s, early 1960s, we look as though we may be moving into a period when one party, the Conservative Party, will have a really clear majority in Parliament. Now, the results of that, I think, are interesting. Bob Mackenzie's already mentioned what the repercussions are going to be on the Labour Party, and I think this is going to be very interesting indeed, what the Labour Party will look upon as the reason for its defeat. He's also mentioned the rise in the Liberal vote. Well, I don't know quite what that means yet. Does this mean we've got a renaissance Liberal Party, or does it mean more a vote of protest, possibly against the way the Labour Party's gone? That I'm not sure about. It will take time to see. But after all, the really striking thing is the effect it's going to have upon the Conservative Party. Conservative Party with a much more secure majority, as now appears probable. Is this going to mean a swing away from the trend towards egalitarianism, equality, which was very marked in the 1940s and held in the 1950s? Well, that would go with things that have been happening in other parts of Europe. There's a swing towards a more diversified society has certainly taken place in Western Germany, and I think in France too. World affairs, well, there it's too early to speak. I don't think make much difference there, but I think it'll have a profound effect upon African affairs. There is no doubt that in parts of Africa at least, the native races have been following this election with great interest. I think the repercussions in the Central African Federation, for instance, will be very interesting indeed to watch. But what still strikes me as the most immediate impression of this election is it looks as if it was a prosperity election. If you follow the pattern of the results, I've been sitting watching them come in, then it is clear that the places in which the trend towards conservatism has not gone on have been Lancashire with its cotton problems, Clydeside with unemployment. Now, it isn't the north of England, because parts of the north of England, Sheffield for instance, Bradford, North East, they've gone towards the Conservatives. Above all, it's Birmingham, London and the south, which have, with the big prosperity, which have shown the swing to conservatism.
Well, once we get the Liberal result, more Liberal results in from the urban areas, we'll call you in and bring you up to date, as it were, on the Liberal vote. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Bullock.
We've returned just to show you Loughborough, where Labour's held the seat, town when they make the bells. I've said it this time. But there has been an accusation that Robert Mackenzie is obviously suffering from liberal bias. Bob, is this true?
Not in the least. I just happened to notice it happening as it came along, and the fact that the Liberals their position was being concealed by the way in which we talked always of swing between the two big parties. And when a development of this kind occurred, it seemed to me to be important to point it out as we came along. But as the Liberals will tell you, I've never had anything to do with any of them.
I may say we spent about 24 hours on this job, if I may mix metaphors, perching on a neutral tightrope. Let there be no other accusations of that kind. Now, where are we? I'm lost. No, we're not lost. We're going to Cliff Mitchellmore. That's fine.
Talk to the general manager of the Liberal Party. Already, with half the results in, the Liberals have already got, 100,000 more votes than they did in the last election. Mr. Herbert Harris, who, as I say, is the general manager of the Liberal Party, is waiting again at the other side of London. Mr. Harris, you must be very pleased, you must be fairly pleased at any rate, at this increase in your vote.
Yes, I'm very delighted, because we set out when we started this election to win some more seats, to be second in many more, and to increase our poll. And already with less than half the results in, we've done all those three things. We have won an additional seat, a magnificent victory in North Devon for Jeremy Thorpe. We've moved into second place quite extraordinarily in some cases in East Surrey, and we've increased our total polls well over 100,000 already.
But how disappointed are you not to have got in, for instance, at Rochdale?
That was a disappointment to me, but I'm sure it will be made up by some victories elsewhere.
No, you won one seat, as you say, in North Devon, which covers up from Barnstaple and Ilfracombe that way, but in the next door constituency, you're only holding on there with Bonham Carter by a mere 200 votes, aren't you? Isn't that in danger in view of the Conservative swing over the country?
I'm sure that if Jeremy wins North Devon, Mark Bonham Carter will have a larger majority in Torrington.
Now, most of the votes you've gained, apparently from our commentators here and our computers, you've gained from the Labour Party. Now, how much do you think that this is a protest vote, and how much is it a real Liberal vote?
I've always thought it was a real Liberal vote. I thought that as the Labour Party replaced the Liberal Party after the First World War, so we should eventually replace the Labour Party after the Second World War. That I think we are doing, and their idealism is being replaced by liberal idealism.
Well, as we say, as Mr. Byers said early, we must wait really until tomorrow to see your final results of the Liberal Party, because that's where a lot of your votes will come in. Thank you very much indeed.
We come back for results. A lot of television personalities are departing to new spheres. Mr. Christopher Chataway has gained the marginal seat from Labour of Lewisham North. There is a face that you will know. The hair, in case you don't know, is very bright red. The majority is 4 times what it was at the 1957 by-election. The previous Labour majority, was 1,110. You see the Conservative one.
So 1.5% swing to the Conservatives compared to 55, when of course they did hold the seat.
At Lewisham West, the Conservative is in. It's Mr. Henry Price. The majority. Apropos of liberal bias on the part of Mr. Mackenzie, we have trapped Mr. Jeremy Thorpe, who won North Devon for the Liberals, and Polly Elvis is sitting with him at this moment in Exeter. Let us go over to them.
Now, Mr. Thorpe, you won the seat from a Conservative, and it seems pretty certain that you're going to be in opposition to a Conservative government. Would you, in fact, prefer to oppose a Conservative rather than a Labour government?
Well, I don't know. I think it depends on the issues. I prefer to oppose a Conservative government on colonial affairs and foreign affairs, and a Labour government on home domestic affairs, for example, nationalisation. But I'm quite willing to shoot at both sides, as I did during my election campaign.
Well, now that you're going into Parliament, do you see your political career as one of steady opposition? Or do you think there's any likelihood of a Liberal government getting in your lifetime?
Oh, I'm quite certain it's coming. We've seen, I haven't analysed the results very carefully yet, but we're quite clearly seeing the Liberal Party coming up and breathing down the neck of the Labour Party.
Well, yes, of course, Mr. Grimond has said, hasn't he, that he hopes to replace Labour as the main opposition party. But do you think that this run of Conservative victories will eventually impose some form of alliance between yourselves and the Labour Party?
Well, that depends. It's a historic fact, I think, that every radical party in time breaks up. This is what happened to the Liberal Party, and it may well happen to the Labour Party. We may see that the extreme left wing of the Labour Party breaks off, and then there might well be a new situation. I can't see a coalition with the Labour Party under their present format with their present policies which they're pursuing.
Well, now, let's look rather more at your own campaign, your own victory. You're a bachelor and a television performer, and I'm told that you've conducted a very gay campaign. Which of these things would you say contributed most to your success?
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't say that either of them in themselves were a vote catcher. I think that people in Devon enjoy a little bit of gaiety, but I think they feel that they have to know you first before they'll stand much of it. And I have been in my division 7.5 years, so I do know it. Like
what about this campaign of yours? I believe you climbed poles at bazaars and dished out buttonholes and things to everyone. But do you think that your victory shows that voters are becoming receptive to this American style of campaign?
No, I don't think so at all. I think that there was a hard, solid Liberal vote and that we got it out.
Thank you very much.
Results back here in London. When I say London, I mean Northern Ireland. Entry.
May not have been watching all the time. You may have missed some of the results you were interested in. Well, we've got only about 15 results still to come this evening. We'll tell you them when they come. But you can take it for granted that the seat you're interested in hasn't changed hands if it's not on this list. Here is the list of the Conservative gains. The first seat to change hands on the night was Holborn and St Pancras, where Geoffrey Johnson Smith won the seat for the Conservatives. Then the Conservatives won Keighley up in Yorkshire and Acton and London suburb where there'd been a good deal of rehousing. Barons Court, which was a very narrow Labour majority last time, 125, went firmly into the Conservative column. Glasgow, Kelvingrove was won back by the Conservatives. It was the Conservative seat in 55 and it turned Labour in a by-election 2 years ago when Walter Elliott died, and it has now been won back by the Conservatives. Although elsewhere in Glasgow, as we'll see, things have been going the other way. They won in the London suburban seat of Willesden East. They beat Arthur Bottomley at Rochester and Chatham. They beat Ian McCardo in Reading. The Conservatives won Sparkbrook, one of their 2 victories in Birmingham. They won the marginal seat of Rugby, again in the West Midlands, where the Conservatives have been making some of their biggest inroads into the Labour vote. They won the Hartlepool. Commander Kerrans of the Amethyst won the Hartlepool. They won the Yardley division of Birmingham. They won Wellingborough, a marginal seat in Northamptonshire. They won Clapham in Wandsworth, in the middle of London. They defeated Arthur Bottomley at Newcastle on Tyne in East. And Elaine Burton in Coventry South was defeated by a Conservative and aided, I think, by the development of housing estates in her constituency. Bristol North West succumbed to a fairly big swing to the Conservatives, which was apparent throughout Bristol, though we've still got Bristol North East to hear from. Uxbridge, Charles Curran won that for the Conservatives, quite a comfortable margin. Birmingham All Saints, I said the Conservatives have gained 2 seats in Birmingham. They've gained 3 seats in Birmingham. And last of the Conservative gains we've heard this evening, Lewisham North, where Chris Chataway won back the seat which the Conservatives lost in the by-election in February 1957. Now, it hasn't all been one way. There have been changes in 2 other directions, which I think we can show you here. Here we've had 3 Labour gains. Firstly, a junior minister, Sir Ian Horrobin, who was defeated in the cotton town of Oldham, in Oldham East. And then 2 seats in Glasgow fell to the fairly big Labour swing, which has been apparent almost throughout Glasgow. There was indeed a swing to Labour compared to 55, even in Kelvingrove, which changed hands back to the Conservatives. Craigton and where Mr Nixon Brown, another junior minister, was defeated, Scottstoun, a comfortable Labour win. And then, standing by itself, Devon North, where the Liberals made their 1 gain of the night, defeating the sitting Conservative, Mr Lindsay. The Liberals have 2 other seats where they get in without Conservative opposition, in Huddersfield and Bolton. They failed, of course, to win the 1 other seat that came in tonight where they might have made an impact, in Rochdale. But on the whole, even in Rochdale, the swing was to the Liberals. Well, we shall come back to this from time to time to make sure that you're up to date and you haven't going away and getting drinks or things like that, which we don't do on the set. You haven't missed some of the really vital results.
Well, here's one. And Aaron Bevan is in again for Ebbw Vale, as no doubt you would expect.
Well, we'll take out 1 or 2 points that Bob Mackenzie made there about the backbenchers, because of the new backbenchers and of the Conservative gains that have been announced in the last few hours, the success of Mr. Peter Emery in Reading, where he defeated the Vice Chairman of the Labour Party, Mr. Ian Mercado, is perhaps one of the most fascinating. And Mr. Emery, as Richard Dimbleby said, is fascinating for quite another reason. That he's one of the joint founders of the Bow Group. It's a group of young Conservative intellectuals who've been pretty important in some ways in this campaign. Now, a great deal has been written about the Bow Group, and they've got something in the region, I believe, of some 50 candidates standing in this election. Now, Mr. Emery, what do you think is the most satisfactory aspect of the whole election and the way it's going?
Well, I think generally that in Reading particularly, so many socialists have fought this election on a matter of class warfare. Most Conservatives have fought this, and I in particular, on class unity. And it's class unity, you know, which is won.
Now, as I said just now, you're one of the joint founders of the Bow Group. Right. How significant a part do you think that they've played in this election?
Not all that significant at the moment. After all, we're fairly new. We've only been going for a matter of about 9 years. But I think it's for the future that we can play an even greater part.
In what way? Harassing a large majority, or harassing your front bench from the back benches, as Mackenzie suggested?
No, we don't want to harass. But, you know, it is terribly important, surely, that the Conservative Party should not be reactionary. Now, I believe that the Bow Group's greatest part that we can play in the years to come is to keep the whole of the Conservative Party progressing forward as a slightly radical section of a new party playing a post-war position in Parliament today.
But isn't this what Mr. Mackenzie was saying, was one of the difficulties of having a large majority in the House?
Well,
that this kind of thing is likely to happen between young Conservatives, young Conservative intellectuals from the back benches.
I'm not an intellectual. You're getting this idea wrong. Many of the Bow Group are purely practical people, and that's all I am. After all, I'm a trade unionist, and the same trade union is Ian Mercado. And here's one of the rank and file of the union defeating one of the executive of the union. But still, what matters, you know, is being able to make certain that practically the Conservative Party advances and that it doesn't stagnate. And after all, with a very large majority, this can be a problem. And I believe that the Bow Group will be able, not necessarily to the pink, but just as a matter of progress in the Conservative vein. After all, I started the idea more conservatism more quickly. And that's, I think, in fact, what we want in this country.
Mr. Emery, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Conservatives have held Battersea South, where their majority in 1955 was 680.
I've given some of these before, but the different swing in the different big cities of England that we've had is probably worth giving you. 1.1% swing to the Conservatives in Liverpool, 1.4% to the Conservatives in Coventry. In Lancashire and Yorkshire, in Lancashire as a whole, no swing either way, dead heat. In the first 10 seats we've had from rural areas, a 1.3% swing to the Conservatives. So there's no particular reason for expecting any different pattern in the results that will be announced tomorrow. On the 5 seats we've had from Wales, a swing of just over 0.5% to the Conservatives. In Bradford, we've had all the 4 seats in there, a 2.5% swing to the Conservatives. In Leeds, a 1.5% swing, 1.7% swing to the Conservatives. In Bristol, we haven't got all the results in there, 2.5% swing to the Conservatives. In Manchester, 2% swing to Labour, one of the 2 big cities which have swung the other way. Edinburgh, well, we haven't got all the results in there. It seems to be running fairly evenly. Slight swing against the Labour Party to the Conservatives. Glasgow, 2.5% swing to the Labour Party. Much the best result area for Labour results so far. Although they did lose 1 seat there, they have gained 2. In Birmingham, much the biggest swing the other way. 3.4% swing to the Conservatives. In London, a 2% swing to the Conservatives. And in the 31 results we've had from Scotland, a 1.5% swing to Labour.
Could I just point out there that we're still talking about 1 or 2 people in 100 changing sides. And this will be called probably tomorrow a Conservative landslide. Well, it's a considerable increase in Conservative strength, obviously, in the House of Commons, but one must not talk of a landslide in public opinion when 1, 2, or 3 people change sides politically.
I see a result is cruising around in the skyline. Here she is. The Conservatives have held East Renfrewshire.
Well, foreign correspondents in London have been busy cabling back their stories of this big swing towards the Conservatives. And one man who's just filed his story is Riccardo Aragno, which is the liberal Italian newspaper. He's the correspondent of the liberal Italian newspaper La Stampa. Now, Mr. Aragno, the Prime Minister said, or I beg his pardon, Mr. Macmillan said not very long ago, that there's far more interest abroad. Is this true of Italy, and is it true of Europe?
No, this is not my impression, and indeed this is not my experience. My paper has required me to file much less than in '55, and the experience of all my colleagues up till now has been exactly the same. You see, the big problem of '59 is that there has been a great division in Europe between the common market countries and Britain on the other side, and perhaps the 7 later on. And the influence of Britain has gone down considerably during the last few years, it seems to me. And the relations between Britain and Europe have not been as good or as intimate as one would have hoped.
Well, Mr. Aragno, how then do you think this swing towards the Conservatives will affect the influence of Britain in Europe now that we've got a Conservative government for another 5 years?
Well, it seems to me that
presumably so.
This is a fairly sad night for European idealists. You see, the position is this: the relationship between Britain and Europe won't change much in actual fact, but the impressions will change very much. A Labour victory would have strengthened the alternatives, what we call the alternatives, the possibility of a changing government in Europe. We have been governed by the Christian Democrats in Italy, in Germany, in France, longer than Britain has been governed by the Conservatives. And this will strengthen, so to speak, the establishments of Europe, and will lessen the chances of the alternatives, which we need very badly.
How surprised do you think your readers in Italy will be when they pick up their papers off the doorstep tomorrow?
Well, just about as surprised as many of us here. We were led to believe from the polls and from the opinions of practically everybody that it was a wide open election, and it doesn't seem like that at all. I mean, I've just been reporting that it seems that the don't-knows knew it all the time.
Mr. Aragno, thank you very much indeed. And that's an Italian view.
We're going straight over to Edinburgh for a result where I understand there's been a recount. Let us go to Scotland and see.
And now for Edinburgh East. Labour candidate E.G. Willis, Conservative and Unionist, the Earl of Dalkeith. And here is the Sheriff.
I have now to announce the result of the election for Edinburgh East constituency, in which there has been a recount. The result, which has been accepted by the parties, is Eustace George Willis,
Labour,
22,244 votes. Walter Francis John Montague Douglas Scott, Earl of Dalkeith, 21,932 votes. And I have to announce that Mr. Eustace George Willis has been duly elected to serve in Parliament as a member for the constituency of Edinburgh East Parliamentary Borough.
Labour has retained Edinburgh East. And now back to Richard Dimbleby in London.
And the Brigadier of the Queen's Bodyguard for Scotland has failed to get the seat for the Conservatives.
But there still was a much above average swing to the Conservatives there, a swing of 2% to the Conservatives against the pattern in Scotland.
Labour, meanwhile, has held Stirling and Falkirk, marginal seat in Scotland. Welcome onto our television screen in the Manchester studio through the medium of Mr. Wicker, who's waiting to talk to them. Over to you.
As we've heard, the Liberals seem to have been going from strength to strength, but there's one Liberal who perhaps hasn't done quite as well as he hoped he'd do, and in fact the first loser we've interviewed, Mr. Ludovic Kennedy, who's failed in his second attempt to win Rochdale for the Liberals. He's in our Manchester studio with his wife, Moira Shearer, having their first meal for some hours, I imagine. Now, Mr. Kennedy, with the considerable increase in the Liberal vote in this country, aren't you disappointed that you failed to pull it off?
Of course I am, yes, of course I am.
And just how disappointed are you?
Well, I'm very disappointed. What more do you want me to say?
The success, let me say, then, of television personalities has already been remarked upon. We've had, for example, Geoffrey Johnson-Smith has got in, Chris Chataway has got in. Do you find that your television fame had helped you or hindered you?
Well, you see, I fought the by-election there 20 months ago and got 17,000 votes, and this time I nearly got 19,000. So I don't really think, as far as I'm concerned, it entered into it very much.
I see. Now, if I could perhaps have a word with Mrs. Shearer, are you going to encourage your husband to continue in politics, Miss Shearer? Or are you going to ask him to take a rest from it now?
Well, I think this is up to him, don't you? I mean, I don't think really I enter into it very much. If he wants to go on with politics, I should be delighted for him to do so. I think he'd make a first-class member of Parliament.
Jolly good show.
Well, let me ask Mr. Kennedy then. What do you think you're going to do?
I'm going to wait and see what happens. I think if you ask me what's going to happen is that the Liberal Party is going to do what Joe Grimm had always said it was going to do, which is supplant Labour as the real progressive party of this country, and then in 5 years' time we'll be challenging the Conservatives for the government of this country.
And what will you do yourself?
I shall be there, batting with the best of them.
Mr. Kennedy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I could look to Miss Kennedy much longer, but I have to announce to you that Labour is in a poplar. Let's rejoin Cliff Mitchellmore.
And the editor of the Birmingham Post that we met earlier tonight was Mr. Vaughan Reynolds. Did you hear what Mr. Mackenzie was saying, Mr. Vaughan Reynolds, about newspapers in general just now?
I did indeed.
How do you react to that?
Well, not awfully well. I feel that in the provinces we've done a pretty fair job, and I do know at least 3 or 4 papers where you would not have to look at the editorial page to find out where their allegiance lay. But on the other hand, there are several which betray nothing until they get to their leader pages.
But how about the national press?
Well, now, that is not for me to talk about.
Why not?
Well, because in the provinces we have rather a more intimate job to do. It's a different job.
What's your headline going to be now? You're going to start an edition going now. It's, what, 5 minutes to 3?
Mm-hmm.
What's your headline on that one going to be?
Our headline's going to be a streamer indicating the state of the parties.
Now, your first one, you showed us, didn't you? How many more editions are you going to print? There's one you sent out earlier. There's one you're about to start printing now. How many more editions are you going to send out before lunchtime tomorrow, for instance?
Oh, there'll be 2 more before we go to bed.
If there is this increased Conservative majority, what kind of a headline will you put in then? And what kind of an editorial will you have?
Well, we've already got an editorial in on the probabilities. And tomorrow we shall do a summing up for Saturday morning's paper.
Well, when will you get to bed, you people up there, then?
I hope to leave the office sometime by 5:30.
And you think you'll know enough then, by 5:30, to have written an editorial that will carry over till the next day?
Well, the editorial which I've written is on the Birmingham and Midland results. But the editorial to be written tomorrow evening will, of course, be on the general trend.
You have, in fact, had some changes in Birmingham. How surprised are you at this?
Well, I'm rather surprised, really. But it does indicate, I think, that the Midlands is very satisfied with how things are going and doesn't want to change. What has happened in Birmingham is quite remarkable, that they have, the Conservatives at last, have regained a majority of the seats, a thing that they haven't had since before the Labour landslide of 1945.
How does this equate to what happens on the City Council?
Well, this year there were Conservative gains on the City Council, but in the past, council elections haven't always reflected themselves in parliamentary elections.
But on this occasion they have. Mr. Vaughan Reynolds, we'll let you get on with rolling your presses. Thank you for joining us.
Is it perhaps a point, Bob, that one should make a distinction about the work of big provincial papers apart from nationals?
Well, I was really talking of the national press primarily, and I certainly would agree that the provincial press has a far higher standard of fairness in reporting politics than has the national press, which makes little or no effort in the popular section of it to distinguish between editorial comment and news.
Hear, hear. As the editor of a very small provincial paper myself, I couldn't agree with you more.
A number of foreign journalists and broadcasters have come to London to report this election, and most of them have been filing their copy during the last few hours. One well-known correspondent from the United States is David Schönbrunn of the Columbia Broadcasting System. Mr. Schönbrunn, do you share Mr. Araño's dismay at the impact of the result of this election upon Europe?
No, not at all. I do agree with him that there was a lack of interest. I do agree about Britain being severed from the continent, although it was not this election that did it. I never have believed that Britain was a part of the continent or of Western Europe. The British have a policy all of their own. But his dismay about the lack of idealism, I must say I do not agree with at all. He seemed to be implying that all of the idealism in this country is in the Labour Party. I think that is certainly not true. And he seems to be overlooking the impact of the Labour Party upon the Tories. There are less and less Colonel Blimps in this country, more and more progressive Toryism. The Tories have taken over Labour's welfare program and many other things. You know, it's very similar to what happened in my country. The New Deal of the Democratic Party was born in the Depression of the 1930s. It finally outlived its usefulness in the prosperity of the 1950s and has had to go into a new kind of labor support for progressive capitalism, a new American way, and I think Labour in Britain must find a new way too. I do not believe that idealism has been lost in this country at all.
Mr. Schönbrunn, what has been the principal comments in the reports that you've been sending back?
Well, that the British democracy is in good shape. It was a quiet and orderly election. This tightens up, I think, again, the Atlantic Alliance and the Anglo-American partnership. And above all, we think that Britain's in very good shape. And we knew from the start that no matter who won this election, Tory or Labour, that my country would not lose an ally.
Now, you've been out and about quite a lot during these last few days, and especially these last few hours. How are you reporting on the British?
Bemusedly. I've been trying to explain why our earlier broadcasts were all wrong about a neck-and-neck race. I blame that on you and your polls and your press. I think, by the way, your press coverage has been shocking, and your radio and television coverage has been excellent. We've told this to the people of the United States.
Thank you, sir.
And on the whole, we've been trying to explain this very surprising early result, and I think the explanation is really very simple. You just can't beat peace and prosperity.
Mr. Schönbrunn, thank you very much.
While Wickham was talking to Mr. Schönbrunn, there's a result in, say, the Conservatives have retained Wokingham. And, of course, the Earl of Dalkeith from the Scottish seat can stand for Parliament. They would like to know why it is they can.
Well, it's straightforward that a man, the Earl of Dalkeith is not, in fact, a peer of the realm. He holds a courtesy title as the son of his father, who is a duke. There are quite a number, I think 5 or 6 members of Parliament, or there were 5 or 6 members of the last Parliament, who were the eldest sons of peers. And if their fathers were, in fact, earls or marquises or dukes, they had a courtesy title. Their fathers were only viscounts or barons. They were just ons.
It might be worth underlining they could not thereby sit in the House of Lords, of course, but with the courtesy title, but then they are free to stand for the House of Commons.
It does also mean that if they get elected and their father then dies, they are likely to inherit the title, and that causes a by-election. Sometimes there are people who are the eldest sons of peers who feel this is a great hardship, and they don't think they can pursue a political career, or constituencies don't want to have them in Parliament because their father might die and that might produce a by-election unnecessarily. And constituencies on the whole don't like by-elections. Money and trouble.
Have there not been 1 or 2 very well-known young people who have refused to take titles that were coming to them for that reason?
Well, there are 2 celebrated cases at the moment. One, Mr. Anthony Wedgwood Benn, who is the heir to his father, who is fortunately still in good health but is of great age. And there is another, of a different example, Lord Altrincham, who has refused to take his seat in the House of Lords because he doesn't believe in being a hereditary legislator.
Then there's Lord Hailsham, Lord Hailsham did all in his power to keep from going to the House of Lords as well.
There are, of course, a great many things that Lord Altrincham doesn't believe in, aren't there? Now, where were we? Something I wanted to ask you, too. Yes. Oh, just to forestall the inevitable, curious viewer who will write to us, who is the Earl of Dalkeith's father? It's the Duke of Buccleuch. Somebody made a big signal to me then, and I don't know what it was for. Never mind, it wasn't for anything. But I wrote down here somewhere, and I'll try and find it if it doesn't keep you waiting too long, something I wanted to ask. Yes, there is a mysterious word. It's spelt P-S-E-P-H-O-L-O-G-Y. It's supposed to be something to do with elections, and I was told that you were. I thought it was a peepologist at first. I'm glad to learn it isn't. It's a cephalogist. And you, David Butler, are a cephalogist. What does it mean?
It means a student of elections. I'm afraid that it's an awful, silly academic joke which somebody else perpetrated and I put in print about 8 years ago. It now hangs like an albatross around my neck. And I am introduced as a cephalogist, and people always stumble over the word, and it's really unfortunate, but it does seem to have got established. And when people want to be rude in columns about election prediction, they say, as the cephalogists say, if they don't say, as the pollsters say.
Well, while you've been talking, I observed they've been repairing Mr. Alan Wicker's makeup in the television studio. He's now looking splendid and ready to take over because he's going to talk to Bristol. Let us go to Alan Wicker.
We go now to Bristol to see how a younger member of the Labour Party reacts to this fairly unexpected defeat. Francis Noel Baker has got in at Swindon and therefore must be relieved himself, but at the same time unhappy about the way his party has fared. Now, does this election mean, Mr. Noel Baker, the end of what's been called the doctrinaire socialist?
Well, it depends who you mean's been calling it doctrinaire socialist. If it means is my party going over to the right, I don't think it does. If it means are we going to the left, I don't think it does mean that either. I think it means that we're going to get down to the job of being an even more effective opposition in this Parliament than in the last one, and getting ready for the next election. At least I hope so.
You feel this is implied, do you?
I beg your pardon?
You feel this is implied by a defeat?
What's implied by a defeat?
That you will get down to the job of being an even better opposition?
Well, yes, I do.
Now, where do you think the biggest changes are going to take place then?
Well, do you mean in government policy? I'm afraid that if this election is interpreted as a green light to the Conservative Party, we may go back to some of the tougher policies of the past, which they've been hesitating about implementing in the last few years because of the possibility that we'd come back this time. What I'm really frightened about is the effects in the international field. I'm very, very worried indeed by the idea that people in Europe and in Africa and in the Middle East and elsewhere should get the feeling that this election is an endorsement of recent British foreign and colonial policies.
I see. Mr. Noel Baker, thank you very much.
There is a result. The Labour has held the seat at Dartford and others. We said that there was an exceptionally low poll. I don't remember anybody saying that, but they say we did.
I did.
They say, in fact, it was 80.2.
I think there must have been an error in Ella's digestion. I apologize on behalf of the lady. We will try and get her to set this right and give you the authoritative electronic figure before long.
Now, don't blame your machine.
We will see, Mr. Elected Member for Lewisham West, whether your figure of 80.2 is correct, because Ella isn't often wrong. Never mind. Well, we've disposed of the Northern Irish one. This is getting like Aunt Maisie's correspondence column, isn't it? Further complaints of Mackenzie's using the phrase our side.
Oh, can I correct that? I have never used the phrase our side referring to any one of the parties, either the Liberals or the Conservatives or the Labour Party. It's quite a slip of the tongue. It may be related to my foreign accent that accounts for it.
You may be aware he comes from across the water. Another message from Liverpool: you're putting on a first-class show, disregard adverse criticism. And there's a special message from me at the end which says, P.S., you must be thirsty. Water.
All demonstrate
Water.
And the secret is he was up almost all last night, too. Got about 1 hour's sleep.
Now, well, we all pretend we aren't up all night, and you who are watching us at home or wherever you are, if you're wise, you're in bed.
I found one of the slightly irritating things about these marathons is afterwards everyone congratulates you on a feat of endurance. Well, it really isn't that, because this is great fun, and if I wasn't on television, I should be just doing this in my own home and trying to make sense of the results. And I'm merely sharing the sort of thing that I find fun with as many viewers as are foolish enough to stay up at 3:18 in the morning.
You want to speak for yourself, don't you? Yes.
Now, I think Bob Mackenzie is corrupted in this way, too. He enjoys elections for their own sake, as I
Tell
do.
me this, a little general question to throw into the pool before we pay another visit, I believe, to the Midlands presently for some conversation. Are there any, ask someone, any exploded assumptions about elections? Things like the campaign doesn't matter, what about the polls and the influence of them, etc., etc. Have either of you come to any conclusion about this election so far?
If I'm allowed to say it, I'm trying to write a book about this election in which I shall try and come to a more judicial conclusion about it than I can at 3 o'clock in the morning after a fairly strenuous and exciting night. But I do think that the most important things that have come out of this election are, one, we've had a little more positive evidence of organisation counting. Two, we've had evidence of more diversity of the results. It's not just that the north and the south have behaved differently, but even different constituencies within a city have shown a slightly greater divergence, presumably a reward for good candidates, a punishment for idle candidates, or a reaction to particular issues. We've also seen the Liberal Party doing much better, I think, than almost any observer or critic who wasn't professionally sympathetic to the Liberal Party had believed. It has been, I disagree fundamentally with a lot of the critics on this, it has been, I think, a television election. And I think the nature of the election has been extraordinarily, the tempo, the feel of the election has been extraordinarily different. I certainly have found it far and away the most exciting election to watch, to go around and see and talk to people. The number of people going to meetings has gone up, and certainly none of the sort of conventional laments about the state of politics seem to have been justified by the way the campaign has been conducted.
I just add to that, too, that despite what some of the remarks that have been made earlier, it's been a pretty good election, you know, a reasonable choice offered to the public between parties that were basically in agreement on the future of the form of government and so on, and a clear-cut decision. And a lot of the gloomy talk about the state of British politics seems to me to be wholly wrong.
Good show. Now tell me something else.
Well, one of the things that my statisticians have done has been, didn't you expect me to answer that, Richard? Has been to find out that if you draw a line across England from the Wash to the Mersey, you get, from the Wash to Bristol, south of that line you get a 2% swing to the Conservatives. North of that line, by deduction, you get very little swing, well under 1% swing to the Conservatives. North and south quite definitely behaving differently. I think that difference is mainly accounted for by Lancashire and the west part of the industrial belt of Scotland.
My friend Mr. Cliff Mitchellmore has re-entered the studio and is sitting down in front of a television set, so let us now join him. To you, Cliff.
Well, we're going back to Birmingham again. As you've heard, the swing to Conservatives in Birmingham has been double that of the country at large. And one of the Conservative victors there is in our Birmingham studio now Sir Edward Boyle. Sir Edward, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but you're a junior minister, were you not, in the last government?
Indeed.
You're the Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Education.
Yes.
Good, I've got it right. Now, what difference will the increase in the seats make, do you think, to the policy of the government?
Oh, I find that a very difficult one to generalise about. I don't think it will make a tremendous difference to the policy of the government, because the thing that struck me so much about this election in Birmingham is that more and more people in Birmingham who are ordinary wage earners are able nowadays to enjoy what you might call bourgeois standards of life. And I think that's had a big influence on the election in Birmingham, and I've no doubt we shall pursue the same economic and social policies that have proved so successful during the last few years.
Now education's been quite a platform, hasn't it?
Indeed.
On both sides, in fact,
yes,
throughout this election. Do you think that this large majority that you're likely to go back with will make any difference at all to your educational policies? Here you are, a man from the Ministry of Education.
I don't think so, no. I think we shall continue with our policy of trying to raise standards in all secondary schools in order that there should be an overlap between the standards at the top of the secondary modern schools and the lower streams of the grammar schools. Incidentally, one thing I would say about education during the election, from my experience, there's been a great deal of interest in the subject, and I do feel that Mr. Gaitskell was on a weaker wicket on this subject than almost any other during the campaign. He did really show by his remarks that he didn't really understand what's happening in many of our secondary modern schools today.
Do you mean by this in the policy that you expounded about the comprehensive schools?
Well, I'm thinking especially of his repeated remarks in the campaign that the Conservative policy denied opportunity to great masses of children. I used to quote there quite often at meetings in order to refute it, and I always got a great deal of applause from my audiences when I did so.
May I turn to something else, Sir, but have you any qualms at all that you on the liberal wing, as it were, of the Conservative Party will now have to give way to the more right-wing elements of the Conservative Party?
I think that's a perfectly fair question, and I think it's very important indeed to see that the progressive elements in the Conservative Party retain their hold. But after all, we have some pretty strong allies in high places, and none stronger than the Prime Minister himself.
Isn't there some danger there might be slightly too many progressive elements? We were hearing just now from the Bow group.
Yes, I think that's perfectly true. To my mind, it's very much more important to look at a subject in an unprejudiced way and say, now, just what exactly is the right thing to do about education? What is the best thing to do about Central Africa? And so I'll look at it subject by subject, rather self-consciously try and frame a progressive policy. And that, I hope, is the sort of way in which the new government will approach our problems.
Sir Edward, thank you very much indeed.
We've been hearing tonight from Labour, Conservative and Liberal politicians and from foreign correspondents. Now let's see what two of the pundits who've been watching things going on in our studio are thinking of it all. Alan Bullock and Bernard Levin. Now, Mr. Levin, after these 5 hours of results, what thoughts are uppermost in your mind?
Well, uppermost in my mind is that the Labour Party, although it would be absurd to talk of this as a landslide against it, it will still have something like 240 seats by the time results are finished tomorrow. The Labour Party has clearly failed to rethink its policy in a way that will capture the imagination of the country as it did last in 1945. It's failed to do that, I think, for the simple reason that it's failed to see the need for that. And I think now the first thing that the Labour Party must do is to ask itself quite simply, basically, where it goes from here, what is it, what should now be its policy? It may be, of course, as some people would say, that I think this would be a gross exaggeration, the Labour Party has outlived its political social function. I think that would be a mistake to think that. But as I see it, the Labour Party must now do some really fundamental rethinking about its policy. Do you agree?
Yes, I do. I think that the danger the Labour Party is in from these results.
What about a Soviet view on everything that's been going on? Might be rather interesting, I think. And I believe we can do that through the agency of Mr. Mitchell-Moore, so let's join him. To you, Cliff.
Can indeed. We've already heard in this programme from an Italian journalist giving a European view and an American journalist. Now, as Richard says, we've got a Russian journalist. He's the London correspondent of Pravda. He's waiting now at the end of Fleet Street for it, Mr. Nekrasov. Now, did the Russians expect this conservative victory, Mr. Nekrasov?
Well, you see, they expected what we were telling them, and quite frankly, we were following what the British press was saying about the neck-to-neck business, and now we have to make some explanations about it.
Do you think they will accept these explanations when they get back to Russia?
Oh, yes, I think they will accept, because they usually follow closely such things, and as all the clever correspondents, we always left some loopholes for this sort of explanations in the expectation of something unexpected.
You mean you're even allowed to leave loopholes in Pravda?
Well, I mean loopholes in my comments on the developments of the electoral fight here.
Mr. Nekrasov, it's been suggested that Russian diplomats, in fact Russian leaders, prefer dealing with capitalists. In fact, I think that Mr. Khrushchev himself actually said this. Now, will this come out in March?
Oh, no, I don't think it will. You see, the point is that, objectively speaking, of course, we might put it in this way, that the Labour Party, whatever we say or write, belongs to the same church as we do. And inside that church, the schisms are fighting much more vigorously than they do fight the religions of different denominations. But still we do belong to the same church. But on the other hand, I should say that these words that are sometimes quoted here in the British press were said more than 3 years ago, and a lot of water flew under the bridges since then.
Will you also write in your column back to Pravda, when you send it back, how badly the communists have done in this country and how many times they forfeited their deposit?
Yes, I'll put their general figures and the results of the fight and compare it with what they did in 1955. You see, and I'll give the explanation to that, but I should say that whatever we say about the Communist Party, the general trend here, which was reflected in the destiny of the Labour Party, was bound to be reflected in the position of the Communist Party.
Mr. Nekrasov, finally let me put this to you, that the leaders of both our major parties have recently been to Russia. Now, which of them do you think made the greatest impression there?
Oh, well, it's a rather difficult point for me rather difficult thing to answer, because I was covering Mr. Macmillan's visit, and I was following it rather closely, and when Mr. Gaitskell was in Russia, I was on holidays. and I was a reader of the press myself at that time. I should say that in general that Mr. Macmillan's visit got bigger coverage in the Russian press, but it's quite natural because he is a prime minister visiting on the state level, and Mr. Gaitskell and Mr. Bevan came there as guests as the representatives of the Labour Party here, of the opposition party. They were invited not by the government, by the Parliament, and the events in Parliaments always get, the events of this sort always get less coverage in the press than the state occasions.
Mr. Krasov, I take your point. Thank you very much indeed.
Labour is in again at Leek in Staffordshire, which David Butler was waiting for so urgently just now. Rejoicing going on of some kind, and join Mr. Kenneth Harris, who is standing outside the door of Conservative Party headquarters.
At the beginning of the evening here at Conservative Party headquarters, I said that the Conservative Party seemed on the whole to be rather cool and collected and not altogether optimistic about the result. They all said they were going to win, but I couldn't find anybody who was willing to predict more than about 35 or 40 seats margin. It was rather significant that at the first point where we thought we might get a Conservative Party leader to come and be interviewed, nobody materialized. And we were told this was because the Conservative Party leaders were cautious and didn't want to start talking before they saw how things were going. Rather curious, because we heard from across the other side of the square that the Labour Party chaps were very ready to talk, and even when things were going against them, they were very ready to talk, whereas over here, when things were obviously going for the Conservative Party, they were still very reticent. Now, what the significance of that is, I don't know. Anyway, things began to improve, and suddenly, it seemed, the Prime Minister arrived, and Conservative Party headquarters immediately took on a completely different aspect. The previous aspect had been cautious, and the new one was festive. The Prime Minister came in, everybody here was absolutely delighted. It was very noticeable, the efforts that he made to congratulate people here, to show how pleased he was with what happened. He was very tired, but he was still ready to meet the press and the BBC and even ITN. And then he went upstairs and he leant out of the window and talked to the crowd who'd gathered outside. He really came to life, and Conservative Party headquarters came to life. But there was this remarkable contrast between the behavior of Conservative Party headquarters in the early part of the evening and the latter part. And it does seem to me awfully interesting that there was no indication here, no feeling here, that the result was going to be quite the way it's turned out to be. And now I hand you back to Richard Dimbleby, back in Lime Grove.
Got here a bit quicker than you expected. There's a result, is there not? The Conservatives have held Harwich.
She says, with the aid of her interpreters, that the probable final majority would be about 115 Conservative over Labour. If the Liberals held their present strength, increased by one, this would be about a majority of 108 over all parties. However, Ella doesn't pretend to know about one or two of these seats, like Merioneth and Inverness and North Cornwall and Torrington, which aren't influenced really by the national swing between Conservative and Labour. I certainly am willing to stick my neck out on saying that the Conservatives will have, when all the seats are in, a clear majority of 100 at least over all parties.
Thank you. And now I think, Bob, you might like to do a brief summing up the situation before we close down.
Well, this certainly has been an impressive Conservative win. They become the first government in modern British history to win 3 full terms of office in succession. On the other hand, this is probably a Conservative country. When you come to look at the history of it, the Conservatives have been in office 2/3 of the time in the last 100 years, and only twice in this century has a party other than the Conservatives won a working majority in the House of Commons, only twice in the 20th century. It's not, on the other hand, a landslide, not as far as seat strength, not as far as popular support is concerned in the country. Something like 1 to 2 people in every 100 have changed sides. And this is given, because of the operation of the so-called Cube Law, this very impressive parliamentary win. But one hopes it will not mislead the Conservatives into overlooking the fact that they still have 45% of the nation on the other side, and they themselves cannot rest upon the kind of majority they've got. Conservative governments with big majorities in the past have not always been good governments. A tendency to slothfulness, to laziness, and the rest has set in. One can see that in the government of 1900, the government of 1924, the government of 1935, if you like. And one hopes, therefore, that after the celebration is over, the Conservatives will face the fact that they've got work to do despite the rather comfortable parliamentary majority. Labour, of course, has another set of problems, tragic in their way. The party, after 59 years of trying, has won 1 working majority in the House. And this in a nation which is 2/3 working class, and a party calling itself Labour, appealing to the working class. And as others have said all evening, it's quite clear that the greatest rethinking of the party's position in history must now take place.
Well, thank you both for those admirable summings-ups. We have, I think, one more result, which I suspect the safe one, probably Northern Ireland, which I think is on its distant way to us. While it's coming, shall we just have one more look at the state, which we've been giving you at regular intervals? There it is.
There you have 387 results in. That leaves us with 242 to come tomorrow, and the one which we think is on its way. The net change, 17 Conservative gains. They're not likely, they'll make a few more gains tomorrow if they can continue on the same form, but about the same number they could do. My arithmetic is going really haywire at the moment. They're not likely to make quite so many gains tomorrow as they have made on the night by the time we're in, if that my prediction is right.
You're getting tired like Ella.
No, not really.
Perhaps I could just recapitulate on what happens from now onwards in this election. We are going very shortly to close down. A little snooze for all concerned, and you too, I hope. The service is opening up again at 6:30 in about 2 hours and a half and a bit from now, when you'll get the situation and the latest party totals. Now, that's going to be repeated every half hour. We ourselves, live, fresh, shaved, suits changed, clean, alert and breakfasted, will be sitting here again at 8 o'clock. We'd like some of you to be here too, please. We shall then continue from 8 o'clock and go on for a further 9 hours or so, by which time Ella will have blown up. In fact, she's been behaving very well then. And that will be the programme tomorrow until sometime in the afternoon, when we shall know what the final result is, except for those odd seats that we never do pick up until Saturday, and I'm sure you won't want us to be sitting here on Saturday as well. Now, the result we're waiting for just won't come, so shall we just sort of...
On the tape, they did say it would only come at 6. I don't think it's worth staying on for another 2 hours.
I'm going to talk to my friend upstairs on the telephone. What about our last result? Yes, David Butler says that he doesn't think it's coming till 6 o'clock. I don't think we ought to wait that long. Right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we hope you sort of enjoyed bearing with us. We've not been entertaining, after all. We've only been informing and trying to keep things straight, which I hope we've done tolerably well. I would like just to say this. I did say in a brief 1-minute piece in BBC television last night, if you want to see the fullest and the fastest results of this election, watch BBC television. And do you know, I was right. That I know. Well, now let's go and have some sleep. We'll be back at 6:30, and as I told you, thenceforth every half hour, and back in earnest at 8 o'clock. So until then, with our best good wishes from all of us, good morning.
time at exactly 5 minutes to 4, we are now closing down. And as Richard Dimbleby has just told you, we shall be back again with the first of our situation reports. That is a report on the situation as it develops between now and then at 6:30. So until then, goodbye.
So, there we are. The BBC's coverage closed down at 5 to 4 in the morning on October the 9th. A recording of the next day's programme, Friday's programme, wasn't kept, so unfortunately we can't show you that. But anyway, the result of the election was the Conservatives won with a huge majority of 100, ending up with 365 seats. Labour lost 19 seats in total. Hugh Gaitskell remained leader until his death 4 years later. The Liberal revival was postponed once again. They went in with 6 and came out with 6. Harold Macmillan remained as Prime Minister until his resignation in 1963, and Labour went on to victory in 1964. The BBC's 1959 election night coverage has been the benchmark, really, of all subsequent general election programmes. Pretty well every one of them has followed the same format. The technology, of course, has changed now beyond all description, but the atmosphere, the excitement has remained the same. I hope it will be when I anchor the general election night coverage next year for the BBC, and I hope you'll be joining us then. So see you in 2010, May probably. Don't know yet. Good night.